Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy and you're joining us live from Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to finalize the deal he reached yesterday to bring Avigdor Lieberman and his Israel Beitenu party into the government with Lieberman as defense minister. Here to fill us in on this dramatic upheaval is IBA's political correspondent Kalev Ben-David.
Tourism Minister Yariv Levin, Prime Minister Netanyahu's chief negotiator on the agreement to bring the six-member Yisrael Beitenu faction into the coalition, met today with faction leader Avigdor Lieberman and with finance ministry officials to work out funding for Lieberman's demand that the government boost support for the pensions of immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Once the agreement is finalized, Lieberman's party will also receive the Immigrant Absorption Ministry held by the Likud's Zev Elkin, who is likely to be shifted to the Economy Ministry portfolio being kept open by Netanyahu. While the choice of the outspoken Lieberman as defense minister has been welcomed by many of the more hawkish members of the government, Likud Knesset member Benny Begin called it a bizarre idea that was delusional and irresponsible. Still unknown is the political fate of current Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, with some reports saying Netanyahu will offer him the foreign affairs portfolio that the Prime Minister is also now holding. Ya'alon spoke today at a Tel Aviv conference, and while he did not specifically relate to the current political maneuvering, he said he was surprised by the lack of moral clarity on basic questions in Israel. The country needs to be steered according to one's conscience and not to whatever direction the wind is blowing, Ya'alon said. Meanwhile, the fallout from Isaac Herzog's own failed negotiations to bring his Zionist Union faction into the coalition is threatening to tear the party apart. After Netanyahu chose Lieberman over Herzog as his new coalition partner, the Zionist Union leader held a press conference last night in which he put much of the blame for his failed negotiations on his fellow party member Sheli Yachimovich, his chief contender for the Zionist Union leadership. Herzog charged that Yachimovich's radical left-wing positions had undermined the Zionist Union and that she had privately begged for a cabinet seat in the government, even while publicly criticizing the coalition negotiations. Yachimovich responded by saying she had refused an offer to become a minister in a unity government, accusing Herzog of lying and of demonstrating a pathetic lack of leadership. The rift between the Zionist Union leaders now seems too deep to heal, damaging the main opposition party. This as the Prime Minister moves closer to boosting his government to a 67-seat majority. Alon?
Kalev, when we appeared on television this time yesterday, it appeared the Prime Minister had a choice. Herzog or Lieberman? Well, now we know it's Lieberman. Why?
First off, I think the price Herzog was asking was too high, especially on diplomatic issues, calling for freezing the settlements, and maybe some economic issues like reworking the gas framework. Second, the price that was being asked by Lieberman suddenly seemed affordable. He wanted the defense ministry, and once the tensions began to grow between Netanyahu and Moshe Ya'alon, it seemed a more attractive prospect to bring in Lieberman to replace Ya'alon at the defense ministry. And third, I think there was growing doubt in Netanyahu that Herzog could even deliver his Zionist Union party, given the opposition from people like Sheli Yachimovich to enter the government on almost any terms.
So in your understanding, were the negotiations with the Zionist Union an attempt from the very beginning to lure Israel Beitenu into the coalition, or were they genuinely conducted in good faith?
I don't know about if I would use the phrase good faith. I did think that Netanyahu was hoping that he could bring the Zionist Union in and create a much broader government. But I think developments caught up with that. And as I said before, especially the growing tensions really just in the last few weeks between Netanyahu and Moshe Ya'alon. I think that just opened up the defense ministry a price for Lieberman that he was not willing to pay until that point.
The Israeli commentariat went into something of a meltdown last night when it transpired that the Prime Minister had offered the defense portfolio to Avigdor Lieberman. Hysteria aside, how can we expect Lieberman to behave in the defense ministry?
Well, certainly his rhetoric has been alarming, talking about invading the Gaza Strip and bringing down Hamas or looking to crush Hezbollah. But of course, as we know, once a politician gets into office, the reality that he faces there is far different from the rhetoric when you're looking at it from the outside. I mean, we've seen Lieberman in a senior cabinet post in the foreign ministry, and it wasn't a disastrous situation, even though, of course, Netanyahu really kept him under check. We have to remember the defense minister does not act in a vacuum. He must answer to the prime minister. And, of course, the IDF chief of staff and the senior generals also have their say. And Lieberman does have a reputation in certain circles as a pragmatist. That being said, once you get into a shooting war, for example, another operation in Gaza, things can happen that could spiral out of control. That will be the real test of how Lieberman's going to act.
Oh, thank you, Kalev. I'm sure Avigdor Lieberman in the Defense Ministry will give us much politics to discuss in future. Thank you. A search is underway for an Egypt air flight that mysteriously disappeared off the radar some 45 minutes before it was scheduled to land in Cairo this morning. The plane is believed to have crashed in the Mediterranean Sea. French officials said they cannot rule out terrorism as a reason for the plane's disappearance. The plane was carrying 56 passengers and 10 crew members and started its flight from Paris shortly after 11 p.m. last night. The Airbus A320 was travelling at an altitude of 37,000 feet when it vanished. Citizens from Egypt, France, Iraq, Britain, Belgium, Sudan, Chad, Canada, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Portugal and Algeria were aboard the plane. Egypt dispatched military search and rescue teams after a Greek Defense Ministry source said it received reports from the captain of a merchant ship claiming to have spotted a flame in the sky approximately 130 nautical miles south of the Greek island of Karpathos. The Iron Dome missile defense system is now operational at sea. The Navy recently carried out a test of the anti-rocket interceptor from a ship in the Mediterranean, with the aim of using the Israeli-designed system to defend the offshore gas rigs. More in this report from IBA's Aryeh O'Sullivan.
The success of the Iron Dome missile interceptor system seen in Operation Protective Edge has now been expanded to the sea. In this test launch a couple of weeks ago, it shot down several short-range rockets from the stern of a moving vessel. The military released this footage now, boasting its success. Head of the Navy, Rear Admiral Ram Rotenberg, said the Iron Dome was an additional weapon system developed for any upcoming confrontation. The missile system will be able to give added defense to the Israeli offshore gas platforms and also to the strategic installations along the coast, like the country's power plants. Until now, the Iron Dome was only fired from land, and the new test proved the additional software and algorithm adjustments made by the Navy can provide a bigger umbrella of security. Aryeh O'Sullivan for IBA News.
Returning to the latest political shake-up, and I'm joined in the studio by political science expert and professor Dr. Gail Talshir of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She joins me now. Dr. Talshir, welcome.
Thank you.
Yesterday we saw some extraordinary political gymnastics from the Prime Minister with his parallel negotiations with Israel Beitenu and the Zionist Union. How can we understand the Prime Minister's negotiating strategy yesterday?
I think, first of all, Israeli politics is fascinating and always has been. And I think what we need to look at it as a long-term process, because in a way there were many pressures from within the government to try to expand the coalition. And what Netanyahu did was to go parallel ways. I'm sure there were other also secret negotiations. We know that the maturation was only coming about in the last 2 days. I'm not sure that Netanyahu himself yesterday was sure what kind of government is going to have to end up with tomorrow. But what we know is that there was this parallel game. It was going on all along. And I think part of the problem was that pressure from within the Likud, in a way, ended up the relationship with the Labour, the Zionist camp party, and towards the negotiations with Lieberman that matured, so we think, today.
Well, by co-opting Lieberman into the coalition, the Prime Minister now has the entire parliamentary right inside the coalition. International pressure aside, are there any domestic factors that stand between this government and implementing a pure right-wing agenda in terms of settlement construction or several recent controversial bills?
First of all, It is the first time that we have a pure right-wing government. It is a good question whether it is a right-wing government or an extreme right-wing government, and Lieberman is moving it towards more the extreme side and not the moderate right. From within the coalition, we do have Kahlon and the Kulanu party that might put some pressure, but we saw that Kahlon today was completely at peace with the idea that Lieberman is going to vote for the budget for 2 years, and therefore he was quite happy to endorse him, hoping that Lieberman is going to be less radical than expected. So where do we expect the opposition to come from? It would naturally come from the opposition itself. We might talk about it in a second. And the international pressure, we already said, the media and the civil society, but the answer is no. It is the first time that a right-wing government can actually go ahead and implement its policies. Whether they're going to actually do it, it's a good question, because as we know from Sharon, things that you see from here, you don't see from another place, and it's not at all clear that even this right-wing government is going to implement right-wing policies.
Well, precisely on the point of the opposition, by leaving Herzog out in the cold yesterday, the Prime Minister managed to humiliate him and divide the opposition. What strategies are available now to the Zionist Union to rehabilitate itself as a credible opposition and alternative government?
Right. So first, the strategy of working from within. You already heard Yechimowicz and Peretz and others saying that they're going to actually compete against Herzog.
Note, it's now entirely possible that the current Knesset might live out its current term to 2019 with the 2-year budget and now the unity on the right. Mm-hmm. Given we have a few years until the next elections, how are the various political parties likely to reposition themselves ahead of the elections? Is a merger on the centre-left likely, or just a theoretical possibility?
Okay, so what we know, the strategy is going to be maybe threefold. First, there are new actors that are waiting to get in and to get into through the center. We know that it failed time and again and again. The idea that you have a new centrist party that is going to become the biggest party, it's failed. So, but still there are people that think this is the viable way. Another way is a unification of the center left, given the egos and the leaders that we see there. It's unlikely at this point, but it might be considered as a good strategy. The other way around is to say, okay, we are the Labour Party, the Zionist camp party. What we need to do is to rehabilitate ourselves, to come up with a very clear social, economic, political, and security agenda, and to try to build 2 years of becoming a real ideological rival to the right. Netanyahu's right.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of strategizing on both sides of the political scene. Dr. Talshir, thank you for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
In other news, just days after saying he wouldn't appeal, former president and convicted rapist Moshe Katsav will in fact go ahead with plans to petition a parole board decision to reject his request for early release from prison. Katsav, who is serving a 7-year sentence for rape and sexual harassment, recently filed a request to have his term shortened by a third. Today, he instructed his attorney, Tzion Amir, to submit the 22-page petition to the parole board. At his attorney's request, the Lod District Court agreed to extend the Sunday deadline for appealing the decision until today. And just 5 months after he was arrested, Ashkelon Mayor Itamar Shimoni has returned to City Hall. This despite facing allegations of taking bribes from contractors and suspicions of rape. Over the past months, Shimoni was barred from entering the municipality's offices. On Tuesday, however, the Rishon LeZion Magistrates Court ruled that the mayor could return to work, but would not be allowed to make any decisions regarding construction, zoning or manpower, and is barred from attending municipal board meetings. Shimoni has yet to be indicted and has so far denied all the allegations against him. Joining us again in the studio for a glance behind the headlines is Amotz Asael, a senior columnist for the Jerusalem Post and the Dow Jones Market Watch. Amotz, welcome.
Hello.
How is the military defense establishment likely to accept the proposition of Lieberman as defense minister? This is a man who, after all, barely 2 months ago participated in a demonstration against the army outside a military court over the Hebron shooting case.
I think that this aspect of the situation will be very quickly forgotten. Everybody's going to be business-minded, especially Lieberman, whose political interest is now to show himself as a pragmatist. In this regard, I don't think there is much room here for drama. he will be very cautious to not provoke and in fact accommodate the generals and show them and everyone else that he can harmonize with them. The problem will be in his political affiliation, which is the first time in Israeli history that a defense minister represents a mere 5% of the Knesset. All previous Israeli defense ministers, from David Ben-Gurion through the forgotten Itzik Mordechai and Moshe Aaron,
who was also fired as well, Itzik Mordechai.
Yes, but they all represented major political parties, with the lone exception of Moshe Dayan in 1967, who represented a party that had only 10% of the Knesset, but it was Rafi and it was established by Ben-Gurion, and was the circumstances of the eve of the 60 war, everything was different, and the stature and authority which he brought with him to the position made that an entirely different context. Lieberman's context is such that he represents a very, very small and marginal party, and that in the configuration of Israeli politics is unprecedented and in my view also problematic.
Well, the incumbent defense minister Moshe Ya'alon comes from the ruling Likud party, and it's impossible to look at Netanyahu's decision to ask him to resign outside the context of the increasing clashes between the prime minister and the defense minister in recent weeks over army-related matters. Was Ya'alon here an unfortunate victim of coalition politics, or was the Prime Minister looking for a way to get him out of the way?
We can only speculate here. None of the actors has said anything even remotely explicit about this. But as speculations go, it is difficult for the public, for the ordinary person witnessing all these dynamics, it is difficult not to suspect that this one was personal, and that this is a demotion, and that this is personal account settling. Ya'alon provoked the prime minister. Frankly, he did that unwisely, although, when he went out and publicly told the generals to speak their minds a moment after the prime minister said very different things on the very same issue to the same people. Despite that, I don't think that this punishment is, in the eyes of the average Israeli, appropriate.
Well, we say punishment. What can we expect to happen to Ya'alon now? Is he going to accept an offer for the foreign ministry, go quietly, or is there some prospect for a political comeback in another party?
He faces a dilemma. My hunch is that he will accept the foreign ministry, but he may not. If he is asking for my advice, then I think that he has positioned himself in such a centrist position, from the Likud's viewpoint, in such a centrist position that his long-term strategy would be to continue cultivating this centrist image that he has already created, and try to use that in order to land at different pastures in the future.
Well, a few days ago, the Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, came out with a declaration urging Israeli parties to unite to advance the peace process. Barak Ravid published an extraordinary report in this morning's Haaretz, alleging that Tony Blair had conspired with Isaac Herzog and John Kerry to encourage the Egyptian president to make these remarks in order to facilitate the entry of the Zionist Union into government. What are we to make of these extraordinary claims?
Well, first of all, I'm unaware that it's a conspiracy. If I'm not mistaken, the Netanyahu was also privy to this effort. And the way we know Tony Blair, it wouldn't be like him to do such a thing behind Netanyahu's back or anyone else's back in such a situation. But having said that, what is interesting here is indeed the Egyptian conduct. Because Sisi's foreign policy since rising to power 2 years ago has been very, very introvert, in contrast to previous Egyptian regimes, which were very diplomatically high profile. Egypt, for instance, in the days of Nasser, created the 9-line bloc. Sadat, of course, was high profile. And Mubarak was an anchor in the Middle East, and he anchored America's presence and interest in the Middle East. Sisi took a different course. He's very introverted. He spends most of his time looking after the Egyptian economy and domestic affairs and fighting terror. He has taken a backseat even in the treatment of the Yemeni conflict and in the Syrian civil war. So it was very unusual for him to come and suddenly make this sortie into the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And I imagine that now that this episode is over, he's going to very comfortably return to his daily routine in dealing with the Egyptian domestic scene.
Well, it remains to be seen how exactly Egypt's going to continue to play a role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Amos.
Thank you, Alon.
Israelis cannot visit Iran, but now they can get close enough. At the Museum for Islamic Art in Jerusalem, which is hosting a new exhibit of posters by the greatest Iranian graphic artists of the last 40 years. IBA's Aria O'Sullivan brings us this report.
When one conjures up images of Tehran, black comes to mind, penetrating and oppressive. But in reality, there are other colors. These colors can be found in a new exhibit at the Islamic Museum in Jerusalem.
The motivation is to try to present to the Israeli public some of the culture of Iran, because usually we deal with Iran through the nuclear bombing and the threatening and so on. So we wanted really to show the people in Iran, the artists in Iran, because most of the Israelis, they are not aware.
How does one express protest in an oppressive regime? These graphic artists have learned to circumvent restrictions and use imagery to get their message across.
They're doing it by hiding more than revealing, or revealing and hiding a game that you have to discover by yourself. The subversive messages will come out gradually, not bluntly like we are used to here in Israel, but in a more delicate way.
Music, Sufi dancing, cinema are all being publicized in these artistic posters, a glimpse into the cultural world of Iran after the Islamic Revolution.
The purpose of this exhibit is to show a fantastic culture, deep creativity, and to show people. Even the enemy is based on human beings, and maybe this is a sign to connect them through art and philosophy and culture, and not by guns and swords.
In order to get around the blanket ban on contacts with Israel, these posters are here under the umbrella of a Czech gallery. And still, not everyone cooperated. The fears and hesitations are strong. The Islamic regime tracks internet and phone conversations, and Persian artists have declined requests by curator Yossi Lemel for interviews, even though he has befriended them abroad.
It's really complicated politically because, as you know, I mean, we don't have a relationship with Jerusalem and Tehran. We are, all of us, willing to enhance the relationship. But we hope that, I mean, by this small initiative in our museum, we can really move better understanding between people in Israel and people in Iran, and maybe between leaders.
Staying with the arts, and the 2016 Doc Aviv Film Festival kicks off tonight at the Tel Aviv Cinematheque and other venues around the city. The annual event, which features over 100 documentaries from Israel and abroad, includes free screenings, workshops and discussions with visiting directors and actors. This year's films deal with a number of issues that have shaped the world in recent years, including the migrant crisis and economic and social gaps. The 18th annual Doc Aviv Festival will run for the next 10 days until the 28th of May. Intel in Israel is closing its Jerusalem production plant and will transfer the majority of its 170 employees to the company's branch in Kiryat Gat. The move is part of the company's global streamlining plan, which will also reduce its workforce worldwide by 12%, including several hundred employees at the company's plants in Israel. Intel's management reportedly assured the government that despite the global downsizing, it will indeed honour all commitments regarding the large grants it has received. In finance, the shekel has put in a mixed performance against major currencies, and shares are down on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Here are the figures. Turning to the weather, and tomorrow should be partly cloudy with a slight rise in temperatures. Saturday looks set to be even cloudier, but a little bit hotter. Here are the highs and lows at Israel and overseas. That brings us to the end of today's show. Join us again on Sunday for the latest news from Israel. Until then, I'm Elon Aslan Levy, wishing you a good evening and Shabbat Shalom, live from Jerusalem.